I used to think I understood how the dead worked. 2 months into the end of the world, you start to believe you have figured out the rules. Zombies are drawn to sound and movement. They are slow but relentless. A bite means death within hours, followed by resurrection within minutes. They wander aimlessly until something catches their attention. And then they pursue it with single-minded determination until they catch it or lose interest. Simple, predictable, survivable, if you are careful. I was careful. That is why I lasted as long as I did. My name is Noah Whitmore. I was a high school history teacher in Larkspur, Kentucky, before everything fell apart. I taught sophomores about the Civil War and coached the junior varsity debate team. I lived alone in a small apartment, graded papers on weekends, and never imagined I would become the kind of person who knows how to kill something that used to be human. But here I am, and I need to tell you what I learned, because if there is anyone left out there who has not figured it out yet, you need to know the truth. The zombies are not hunting us. They never were. They are herding us. It started with small things I did not notice at first. I was too focused on survival to see the pattern. Our group had established a base in an old furniture warehouse on the north side of town. 11 survivors who had found each other in the chaos and decided that together was better than alone. We had food, water, weapons, and walls thick enough to keep the dead out. We had routines. We had hope, or something close enough to pass for it. I was on a supply run with 2 others, a woman named Diane Corbett and a man named Owen Perry, when I first started to see it. We were scavenging an abandoned pharmacy on the edge of downtown, filling bags with antibiotics and bandages, when we spotted a group of zombies through the window. 5 of them, shambling down the middle of the street. This was routine. We ducked into the back room and waited for them to pass. But as I watched them through a crack in the door, something felt wrong. They were walking in formation. Not a tight formation, not like soldiers, but a loose grouping that suggested they were traveling together on purpose. They moved at the same pace, in the same direction, like a family heading to church on Sunday morning. I told myself I was imagining things. Zombies do not have purposes. They do not make plans. They are dead flesh animated by something nobody understands, driven by hunger and nothing else. But I could not shake the feeling that I had just seen something important. That night, I took a shift on watch. I sat on the warehouse roof with a pair of binoculars, scanning the streets for movement. Around midnight, I saw another group. 20 zombies this time, maybe more, moving through the darkness about 2 blocks away. They were not wandering. They were walking in the same direction, at roughly the same pace, like a crowd leaving a stadium after a game. They were heading east, toward the river, the same direction as the group from earlier. I mentioned it to Diane the next morning. She was the closest thing I had to a friend in the group, a former nurse in her early 40s who had lost her husband and teenage son in the first month. Diane was practical and level-headed, not prone to seeing things that were not there. She told me she had noticed it too. Over the past few weeks, she had been paying attention to where we encountered zombies during our supply runs. Not keeping formal records, just mental notes about the patterns. She had noticed that the zombies seemed to be concentrated in certain areas, and almost absent from others. More importantly, she had noticed that the areas where zombies gathered tended to be west, north, and south of our warehouse. The area to the east, toward the river, was almost always clear. I asked her what she thought it meant. She shook her head. She did not know, but it did not feel random. A few days later, I led a supply run to a grocery store on the western edge of town. We had picked the closer locations clean, and our food supplies were getting low. The group consisted of me, Owen, and a younger man named Curtis Webb, a college student who had been visiting his grandmother in Larkspur when everything fell apart. We made it to the grocery store without incident. The parking lot was empty, the windows were intact, and there was no sign of recent activity. It looked almost too good to be true. It was. We were loading supplies into our bags when Curtis spotted movement outside. He called a warning, and we rushed to the windows to see what was happening. Zombies were converging on the store from 3 directions: west, north, and south. Dozens of them, maybe more, emerging from side streets and alleys and the overgrown lots of abandoned businesses. They were not running. They were not making noise. They were just walking, slowly and steadily, forming a loose semicircle around the building. I had seen zombie swarms before. This was not a swarm. Swarms are chaotic, drawn by some trigger that pulls them all to the same place at once. This was coordinated. The zombies were spacing themselves out, covering every possible escape route except one: east. We had no choice. We grabbed what we could carry and ran east, through the back door of the store, across an empty lot, down a residential street where every house stood dark and silent. The zombies did not chase us. They just followed at a steady pace, maintaining that loose semicircle, never getting too close, but never falling too far behind. It took me almost an hour to lose them, and by the time I did, we were 3 miles closer to the river than we started. Back at the warehouse, I gathered the other survivors and told them what happened. I expected disbelief. I expected rational explanations. Instead, I got silence. And then, slowly, others started sharing their own stories. A woman named Ruth Penning described a supply run last week where she was cut off from her partner by a group of zombies that seemed to appear out of nowhere. She escaped by running east. Her partner was not so lucky. A man named Gregory Hale talked about the night he and 2 others tried to leave Larkspur entirely, heading north toward the highway. They made it about a mile before encountering a wall of zombies blocking the road. They turned back. The zombies did not follow. Owen mentioned something he had noticed weeks ago, but dismissed as imagination. The zombies seemed to avoid certain buildings and streets, almost like they were leaving a path open, a path that led east. By the time everyone had spoken, the picture was clear. The zombies were not hunting us. They were herding us. Every attack, every chase, every close call over the past 2 months had been pushing us in the same direction, toward the river, toward something. The question was, toward what? I decided we needed to find out. If the zombies were driving us somewhere, we needed to understand where and why before we were forced there against our will. I asked for volunteers to scout the Eastern District. Only Diane agreed to come. We left at dawn, moving carefully through streets that were eerily empty. The Eastern District was Larkspur's old industrial area, a maze of warehouses, factories, and rail yards that had gone quiet decades before the outbreak. The buildings here were massive and decaying, their windows dark, their walls covered in faded paint and rust. As we moved deeper into the district, I noticed something strange. There were no zombies here. None. In every other part of town, you could expect to encounter at least a few wanderers, even in the quietest areas. But the Eastern District was completely still. The only sounds were our own footsteps and the wind moving through broken windows. We found signs of other survivors, abandoned camps, discarded supplies, a child's shoe lying in the middle of the street, but no people, no bodies, no zombies, just emptiness. We reached the river by mid-morning. The Larkspur River is not large, maybe 100 feet across at its widest point, but it is deep and fast-moving. In the old days, there were 3 bridges connecting the city to the farmland on the other side. Now, all 3 bridges were blocked. Not destroyed, blocked. Zombies stood shoulder to shoulder across each bridge, hundreds of them, forming walls of rotting flesh that stretched from one side to the other. They were not moving. They were not wandering. They were just standing there facing the city like guards at a checkpoint. I stared at the sight for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The zombies were not attacking each other. They were not trying to cross the bridge. They were holding a line. Diane grabbed my arm and pointed downstream. There was a 4th crossing, not a bridge, but a shallow spot where the river ran over a bed of rocks. It would be difficult to cross, especially while carrying supplies, but it could be done. The shallow crossing was completely clear. No zombies, no obstacles, nothing standing between the city and whatever was on the other side. The path was open. They wanted us to cross. I knew I should turn back. I knew that whatever was waiting on the other side of that river was something I did not want to see. But I needed to understand. I needed to know what all of this was for. Diane argued against crossing, but she did not try to stop me. We picked our way over the slippery rocks together, the cold water soaking through our boots. The farmland on the eastern bank looked normal at first. Fields gone wild with weeds, farmhouses standing empty, a grain silo rising against the grey sky. But as we moved inland, I started to notice things that were wrong. The fields were not just overgrown. They had been trampled, thousands of footprints pressed into the soft earth, all heading in the same direction. East, away from the river, toward a low ridge about a mile distant. We followed the trail of footprints to the base of the ridge. Diane said we should turn back. We had seen enough. We knew the zombies were herding survivors across the river and toward something on the other side of that ridge. We did not need to see what that something was, but I did need to see. I needed to understand. I climbed the ridge alone while Diane waited at the bottom. The slope was gentle, covered in dead grass that crunched under my feet. It took me about 10 minutes to reach the top. What I saw on the other side will haunt me for the rest of my life. The ridge overlooked a shallow valley, maybe half a mile wide and a mile long. The valley floor was covered with people, thousands of them. maybe tens of thousands. They were standing in rows, perfectly still, their faces blank, their eyes staring at nothing. They were not zombies. They were alive. I could see them breathing. I could see the slight movements of their bodies as they shifted their weight from foot to foot. But they were not moving. They were not talking. They were not doing anything at all. They were just waiting. At the far end of the valley, something rose from the earth. I cannot describe it. My mind refuses to process what I saw. It was large, larger than any building in Larkspur, and it was not still. It moved in ways that made my eyes water and my stomach heave. It had parts that might have been limbs or might have been something else entirely. It had openings that might have been mouths. The people in the valley were facing it. They were arranged in neat rows leading up to those openings, like lines at a ticket counter, like passengers waiting to board a plane. As I watched, the front row of people began to walk forward, slowly, calmly, without hesitation. They walked directly into the openings of the thing at the end of the valley. They did not come out. I did not wait to see more. I scrambled back down the ridge, grabbed Diane, and ran. Back at the warehouse, I told the survivors everything. The blocked bridges, the open crossing, the trampled fields, the valley full of people, the thing. I did not have words to describe the thing. I tried and failed and tried again. The best I could manage was this. It was alive, it was hungry, and it was patient. The zombies were not random. They were not a plague. They were shepherds, driving humanity towards something that wanted to consume us. Not our bodies. Something else. Something deeper. Some of the survivors wanted to fight. Some wanted to hide. Some just sat in silence, staring at the walls, processing the reality that everything they thought they knew was wrong. Over the next few days, the zombie activity around the warehouse increased dramatically. Where there were once occasional wanderers, there were now constant patrols. Groups of 10 or 20 circled the building at all hours, never approaching too close, but never leaving either. We could not go outside without being spotted. Supply runs became impossible. The message was clear. Stay here and starve, or move east and face whatever was waiting. Some of the survivors started talking about the crossing, like it was inevitable, like it might not be so bad. Gregory Hale said that maybe the thing in the valley was not what I thought it was. Maybe it was something else. Maybe the people there were being protected, not consumed. Maybe the zombies were saving humanity, not destroying it. I recognized the tone in Gregory's voice. It was the same tone I had heard from people who were about to give up. The same tone my brother Kevin had in those final days before the outbreak took him, when he stopped fighting and started waiting for the end. I did not argue. There was no point in arguing with despair. On the fourth night of the siege, Diane came to me with a confession. She had been thinking about the valley, about the people standing in their rows, about how peaceful they looked. She had been thinking about her husband and son, about the way they died, about the months of running and hiding and fear that had defined her existence since the outbreak. She was tired, Noah. She was so tired. She said she thought she understood now why the people in the valley were not afraid. She thought whatever the thing did to them, it took away the pain. It took away the fear. It took away everything that made survival so hard. She asked me if that would really be so terrible. I did not know how to answer. I had been asking myself the same question. The honest truth was that I was tired too. I had been tired since the moment my brother died in my arms, bitten and bleeding, apologizing for not being faster. I had been carrying that exhaustion for 2 months, and it was getting heavier every day. But something in me refused to accept the valley as an answer. Something that might have been hope, or might just have been stubbornness. I told Diane that I did not know what the thing did to people, but I knew that the zombies wanted us to go there. And anything the zombies wanted could not be good for the living. Diane nodded slowly. She said she understood. She said she hoped I was right. That night, Diane left the warehouse. I found her note in the morning, scratched on a piece of cardboard. "I'm sorry. I could not wait anymore." I never saw her again. 1 week after Diane's departure, the food ran out. The water would last another few days, but without food, it did not matter. We were going to die in this warehouse, or we were going to take our chances outside. Some had already made their choice. Owen left 2 days ago, heading east without a word. Ruth followed him the next morning. Curtis tried to go north, to break through the zombie line, and did not come back. Gregory had not spoken in 3 days. He just sat in the corner, staring at the wall, waiting. There were 5 of us left. 5 people who had not given up, who were not ready to walk into the valley, who still believed there might be another way. I proposed a plan. It was desperate and probably suicidal, but it was the only option I could see. We would leave at night when the zombies were harder to see. We would head west, away from the river. We would move fast and quiet, avoiding contact whenever possible. If we could make it to the edge of the city, if we could break through the perimeter, maybe we could find somewhere they had not reached. It was not much of a plan, but it was better than walking into the dark. We left at 2 in the morning. I led the way, followed by Gregory, Ruth's teenage daughter Amelia, who had refused to follow her mother, an older man named Bernard Cross, and a woman named Wendy Cole, who rarely spoke but had proven herself useful in a crisis. The streets were dark and quiet. The zombies were there. I could sense them in the shadows, but they did not attack. They just watched, following at a distance, maintaining that loose perimeter they had used all along. We moved west, sticking to alleys and backyards, avoiding main roads. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. We covered almost 2 miles without incident. I allowed myself to feel something that might have been hope. Then the zombies started closing in. It happened slowly at first. They emerged from doorways and side streets, not attacking, but blocking, cutting off routes, forcing us to turn, to backtrack, to choose paths that led away from the western edge of town. I tried to push through. I used a crowbar to put down 2 that got too close, creating an opening, but more appeared to fill the gap. Always more. We were forced south, then east, then south again. By dawn, we were back where we started. The warehouse loomed ahead of us, surrounded by zombies that parted like a curtain to let us through. The message was clear. You can run, but you cannot escape. The only path is east. Over the next 2 days, the remaining survivors began to break. Gregory walked east without saying goodbye. Wendy followed a few hours later. Bernard tried to hang himself in the warehouse, but I cut him down in time. He did not thank me. By the end of the second day, only Amelia and I were left. Amelia was 17 years old, quiet and watchful, with her mother's practical nature and a stubbornness that reminded me of myself. She had not talked about going to the valley. She had not talked about giving up. She just kept moving, kept breathing, kept looking for a way out that might not exist. I felt responsible for her. She was young enough to be my student, young enough to have a future, if there was any future left to have. I could not save myself, but maybe I could save her. I told her about the shallow crossing, about the valley on the other side, about what happened to the people who went there. I told her that I thought the zombies were less focused on the young, that they seemed to concentrate their herding on adults. I told her that if she could make it north, into the mountains, she might be able to find the place they had not reached. Amelia listened, then shook her head. She said she was not leaving without me. She said we would find a way out together or not at all. I wanted to argue, but I did not have the energy. I was so tired. The last night in the warehouse, Amelia and I sat on the roof, watching the zombies circle below. There were hundreds of them now, maybe thousands, a slow-moving river of the dead that flowed around the building without ever touching it. Amelia asked me what I thought the thing in the valley was, where it came from, what it wanted. I said I did not know. I had thought about it constantly since I saw it, and I was no closer to understanding. Maybe it was something that had always been here, sleeping beneath the earth, waiting for the right moment to wake up. Maybe it came from somewhere else, somewhere beyond the sky or beneath the ocean or outside of everything humans could perceive. Maybe it did not matter where it came from. What mattered was that it was here now, and it was hungry, and the dead served it. Amelia asked if I thought fighting was pointless, if we were just delaying the inevitable. I thought about the question for a long time before answering. I said that maybe it was pointless. Maybe everything we had done since the outbreak had been pointless, just rearranging furniture while the house burned down. But pointlessness was not the same as meaninglessness. The fight mattered, even if we lost. The resistance mattered, even if it failed. Being human meant refusing to accept the unacceptable, even when acceptance would be easier. I did not know if I believed what I was saying, but I knew it was what Amelia needed to hear. Dawn came. The zombies were still there, patient as always. We were out of food, nearly out of water, and exhausted beyond the point of clear thinking. I made a decision. I told Amelia that I was going to create a distraction. I was going to draw the zombies away from the north side of the warehouse, open a path for her to escape. I was going to make as much noise as possible, keep them focused on me for as long as I could. She needed to run north, toward the mountains, and not look back. Amelia refused. She said she would not let me sacrifice myself for her. She said we agreed to find a way out together. I said there was no way out for me. I was too tired. I had been too tired for a long time. But she was young and strong and stubborn. And if anyone could survive this, it was her. I needed her to live. I needed someone to remember what happened here, to tell the story to anyone who would listen, to prove that humanity did not go quietly into the dark. Amelia was crying. She was angry. She was everything a 17-year-old should be when faced with an impossible situation. But in the end, she nodded. I waited until the sun was fully up, then put my plan into action. I had gathered every noisemaker I could find: pots, pans, a battery-powered radio, my own voice screaming at the top of my lungs. I burst out of the warehouse's main entrance, making as much commotion as possible, running south toward the densest concentration of zombies. They reacted immediately. The slow-moving river of the dead shifted, turned, converged on me. Hundreds of rotting faces turned in my direction. Hundreds of decaying hands reached for me. The sound of their movement was like dry leaves in a hurricane. I ran. I did not run east toward the river. I ran south, then west, leading them away from the warehouse, away from Amelia. I was faster than they were, but there were so many of them, and they did not get tired. Behind me, if everything went according to plan, Amelia was slipping out the back of the warehouse and heading north. I could not look back to check. I could only hope. I ran for what felt like hours. My lungs burned. My legs ached. Every breath was a knife in my chest. But I kept moving, staying just ahead of the horde, leading them deeper into the western part of the city. Something strange happened as I ran. The zombies began to thin out, not because they were giving up, but because they were splitting off, peeling away from the chase, heading back toward the center of town. The ones that remained were the fastest, the freshest, the most recently turned. But even they seemed less interested in catching me than in keeping me moving. They were still herding me. Even now, even as I tried to escape, they were guiding me somewhere. I changed direction, heading north. The zombies adjusted, cutting off that route, forcing me east. I turned south. Same result. West. Same result. The only direction they allowed me to go was east, toward the river, toward the crossing, toward the valley. I reached the river just as my body finally gave out. I collapsed on the bank, gasping for air, my vision swimming. The water rushed past a few feet away, cold and fast and indifferent. The zombies had stopped chasing me. They stood in a loose semicircle, blocking every direction except the shallow crossing. They were not moving. They were just watching, waiting. I lay there for a long time, staring at the sky. I thought about my brother Kevin. I thought about Diane. I thought about all the people I had seen walk east, never to return. I wondered if Amelia made it. I hoped she did. I thought about what I told her on the roof, that the fight matters even if we lose, that being human means refusing to accept the unacceptable. I pushed myself to my feet. The zombies watched me, their milky eyes tracking my movements. They did not advance. They did not need to. They knew where I was going. They had always known. I turned and looked at the shallow crossing. The water sparkled in the morning light. The far bank was peaceful, almost inviting. The thing in the valley was waiting for me just over the ridge. I could feel it somehow. Feel its patience. Feel its hunger. I had two choices: cross the river and join the thousands who had gone before me, or die here on the bank, a final act of defiance that would accomplish nothing except proving that I refused. I thought about it for a long time. Then I turned away from the crossing and faced the zombies. They stood in their semicircle, patient and silent, waiting for me to make my choice. The river rushed behind me. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the ridge, the thing in the valley continued its endless consumption of everything humanity had been and could have been. I thought about Amelia, about whether she made it to the mountains, about whether there were others out there who had figured out what the zombies really were and found a way to resist, about whether humanity had any future at all. I did not know the answers. I could not know. All I could do was make my choice and live or die with the consequences. I took a breath and I decided. Somewhere in the mountains, weeks or months or years later, a young woman walks through a forest alone. She is thin and weathered, her clothes patched and repatched, her eyes old beyond her years. She carries a makeshift spear and a backpack filled with supplies scavenged from abandoned cabins. She stops at a ridge overlooking a valley far below. In the distance, barely visible through the haze, she can see the ruins of a city. The dead move through its streets like ants in a colony. But they have not come to the mountains. Not yet. Amelia turns away from the valley and continues walking. She does not know if there are other survivors out there. She does not know how long she can keep running. She does not know if Noah's sacrifice meant anything, or if he even made it to the river before the end. But she is alive. She is still fighting. And as long as she keeps moving, the thing in the valley does not have her. The zombies are still herding, but they have not caught everyone. Not yet.